when you go from being trapped in hell to feeling normal, that's heaven on earth. My earliest memory is running around the middle of the night feeling abandoned, feeling terrified. Because when you're that young, abandonment is tied to the same feeling as dying. You got this, champ. Keep going. I never used to have that. I used to have the opposite. You suck. You always mess up. I realized that more zeros in my bank account was not going to fix anything. I was miserable. Like, going through life basically trapped in fight, flight, or freeze is a horrible way to live. Only at the point where it got to be where she was even worse to me than I was to myself, only at that point did I finally leave. And at the end of the day, if you are dealing with trauma, you basically have three choices.
I am here with Shalev Amar on top of a beautiful mountaintop somewhere in Paradise Valley near his home. And usually I do these while hiking. And today is such a beautiful view, nice weather, that we're going to actually have a conversation right up here on the mountaintop. Shalev, can you share a little bit let me share about you, and then we can dive in. So Shalev and I have known each other for about, I'm going to say 4 years. And Shalev runs a very successful law practice that's growing and thriving here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And in addition to that, and I'll let him talk about it, his passion and purpose through his own journey is about helping people with trauma. So with that background, Shalev, and appreciate you taking the time to take this hike with me near your home. We've been trying to do this for maybe 3 years. Share a little bit about what your passion is and why, and we'll dive a little deeper as you give us tidbits.
Sure. So basically, long story short, most of my adult life, I had very severe generalized anxiety mixed with social anxiety. Although I was professionally relatively successful in my personal, especially intimate relationships, I had several relationships fail. And after one particularly painful breakup of a 4-year relationship, the first year was good. The last 3 years were basically a living hell. I hit rock bottom. I was having panic attacks, constant anxiety, insomnia, trouble sleeping. Like, I would have massive, rapid heartbeats, trouble breathing, tossing and turning all night. I just got to an enough is enough point where I just couldn't live that way anymore. I realized that more zeros in my bank account was not going to fix anything, because, I tried all the, traditional ways to have a happy life, like make a good living, have an attractive partner, go on trips, but none of it worked. And the reason is because I had a bunch of unresolved childhood trauma that I had never dealt with. And the number one thing that I want people to understand is that time does not heal wounds when it comes to trauma. Trauma basically accumulates in your body and nervous system. It also causes parts of your brain to be over and underactive. And the metaphor that I use to describe trauma is it's kind of like having a nail or a huge thorn stuck deep in your arm. And you could put numbing cream on it. You could take pain medication. The relief will only be temporary. The only way that you will heal is by pulling out the nail, pulling out the thorn. But pulling it out is painful. And that's the reason why a lot of people don't do it. And I think also a lot of people just think that if they repress or ignore or suppress, that it will just somehow magically go away. But all it does is the trauma will pop out, typically in inopportune times in your life, and it will sabotage your health, wealth, and relationships, and also just your day-to-day happiness, because I was miserable. Like, going through life basically trapped in fight, flight, or freeze is a horrible way to live. I don't wish it on my worst enemy. It's kind of like, say a car almost hits you, or kind of the vertigo feeling that you get if you're super high up and you almost fall. That's how you feel like the entire day. It's an awful way to live. And so, although it can be challenging to face your trauma, and it's actually painful to go through the healing process, especially in the beginning, over time, as you start to pull out the thorn, you start to feel better. But it's a process to basically detox yourself from trauma. You have to process and release the trauma. That is the key to ultimately healing and getting to a better place. And so I just see a lot of suffering out there. There's so many social problems and just general unhappiness tied to trauma. The prisons are filled with traumatized people. There's so many failed relationships, such a high divorce rate, almost 50% of marriages. A lot of that is trauma-based. Trauma is passed intergenerationally, amongst families, both epigenetically. They've actually done studies like, for example, if you shock a rat, their offspring will also be scared of being shocked, even if you've never shocked them. So trauma actually gets physically passed on, but it also gets passed on by, parents losing their temper with their children, or fighting with each other, or even physical or emotional abuse. And it just goes from one generation after another until finally somebody says enough and decides that they're going to do whatever it takes to overcome trauma. And that's the point I hit. And at the end of the day, if you are dealing with trauma, you basically have three choices. You can keep going as is and suffering throughout your life. You can keep having problems in relationship, keep dealing with betrayals, keep dealing with just general unhappiness, massive anxiety, health issues, addictions. So that's your one option. The second option is, you could just give up and take your life, but that will devastate your family and friends. I'll tell you, my best friend committed suicide, 15 years ago at this point, and still when I think about it, it's awful. And so, his whole family was devastated by what happened, and his friends too. And I feel a big void in my life because he's gone. We never got to hold each other's children. We missed on so many amazing experiences that we could have had, just simple bantering and joking around like we used to do. That doesn't happen. So that's the other option, to just give up and end it. Your third option is to do the work, to decide, I'm going to face this. I'm going to be consistent about doing what it takes to overcome trauma. I'm going to be open-minded. I'm going to try different things and find what works, and then double down on what works. And if you do that, it'll take some time, but you will overcome trauma eventually, and your life will be so much better. Just simply day to day, you won't be dealing with massive anxiety. You'll just feel normal. And for somebody who's traumatized, who has massive anxiety, sometimes mixed with depression, just feeling normal is such a huge gift.
Wow. Well, I want to, because stories are so powerful, and you shared a little bit of the things you were going through, but I would love for someone who's maybe looking at this, I've certainly seen the after. I know it's work in progress, but the after, you have business success, you've, got a beautiful new home, you're looking at all these great, baby, all these wonderful things. But can you take us, if you're open to sharing it,
Sure.
kind of like what is one chapter or vignette that was so painful for you that was the kind of the proverbial, you hit rock bottom, that made you decide to really pour yourself into option 3?
Well, what happened was, like I said, the painful breakup of the 4-year relationship. Just long story short, the first year was pretty good, but then the last 3 years were just a nightmare. I like to joke that she put me through my own personal Holocaust. And that's, by the way, one of the ways to deal with trauma is it's a type of reframe where you think of traumatic stuff that's happened and you kind of, you have a more lighthearted perspective about it. But in any event, so back to what happened. She was just nasty to me. She would yell at me for frivolous reasons. She would snap at me. She was sarcastic. She was unkind. Just a couple of examples. I would ask her like something innocuous, like, "Hey, I can't find my keys. Did you happen to see them?" And she would either yell at me, being like, "How should I know?" Or she would say something unkind and disparaging, like, "You don't ever pay attention. Like, aren't you an attorney? How come you can't even keep track of your keys? Like, I can't believe that you're even an attorney." In family events and parties and such, she would humiliate me in front of my family and friends, just, calling me out, saying rude things in front of other people. It even got to the point where my cousin said, "Look, I love you, man. I'll always hang out with you, but I'm sorry, I can't be around you when you're with her. It's just too uncomfortable for me to see how she talks to you, to see how upset you get. And, I could tell that you're just biting your tongue to not like cause a scene in front of everybody, but it's just so hard to be around." And I also had multiple friends who would say stuff like, "Hey, you're invited to the barbecue. Please don't bring your girlfriend." And it was embarrassing and humiliating.
So here you are in a embarrassing, humiliating relationship, and for those who on the outside, like your relative, your cousins would say, "Hey, like, why is he in this relationship?" How would you explain to someone the condition of what's going on and what was going on in your head that you stayed in that relationship from a trauma perspective?
Well, there's multiple reasons. Logically, I didn't like it, and I knew the behavior was disrespectful and unacceptable. The problem is that your subconscious, like the emotional part of your brain, is more powerful than the logical part of your brain. And so, I did have some childhood trauma, just briefly. One of the things was I grew up in a weird little communal farming village where they did kind of social experiments, and I was taken away from my parents at a year old, put in these little like children's dormitories. And apparently I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be running around in the middle of the night trying to get home. My earliest memory is running around in the middle of the night, feeling abandoned, feeling terrified. Because when you're that young, abandonment is tied to the same feeling as dying, because you are helpless. You're totally dependent on your parents. And so I had this deep underlying abandonment wound that would keep me trapped in unhealthy relationships, because the breakup would trigger the abandonment issues. And then I would have, panic attacks, severe anxiety. So that's number one. Number two, my parents fought a lot. So that's just kind of the early social programming that I had, was like, oh, when people love each other, you interpret it from a child's perspective. Oh, love means you fight all the time. So that's number two. Number three, my dad had severe BPD. He was traumatized himself. He's passed away. And I'm not a blame your parents, bash your parents type guy. Your parents do the best they can with the level of awareness that they have. Like, my dad taught me integrity, hard work, self-reliance. People are complicated, but he had severe trauma that was unresolved. His father, my grandfather, was a Holocaust survivor, and a raging drunk and womanizer, and abused the family. And so my dad was even more traumatized than me, but because he didn't face his demons, he passed on those demons, to his family, and to me in particular. And so he would scream at me a lot, berate me. Like, if I would drop something, he would just go berserk and start screaming at me. It was so bad that even in adulthood, if I would spill something, I'd almost have
Oh,
an
wow.
anxiety attack because
Wow.
of like the hundreds of times I got yelled at for that. And he would say nasty things to me like, "You always this," like always everything terrible, and like, "You never blah blah blah," like never anything good, and you're not like so and so's kids, and so like just screaming like a fucking lunatic at me.
Wow.
And so when you look at that background, yeah, when you're in a relationship that recreates those dynamics,
It's normal.
it's you don't like it, but it's normal. And it had to get to the point, and it's also frankly like you have low self-worth when you've been traumatized, and so I would internally beat myself up. I had a very negative inside voice. It was basically my dad's voice in my voice, constantly attacking myself, criticizing myself, victimizing myself. And so you'll stay with a person until they are worse to you than you are worse to yourself,
Wow.
than how you treat yourself. And so, yeah, I treated my own self internally because of the early programming, treated myself awfully, was very unkind to myself, like the opposite of self-compassionate. So she was just, about as nasty to me as I was to myself. And only at the point where it got to be where she was even worse to me than I was to myself, only at that point did I finally leave.
That's such a powerful quote. When someone's worse to you than you are to yourself. So basically, your threshold is your own
your own self-love.
That inside voice in your own self-love.
Yeah,
that's super powerful. So if someone was listening to this and maybe understands they probably have some really traumatic self-talk, self-love, they got some things going on. What are some, this actually came up in, Shalev is part of a mastermind group that I lead, Life Impact Accelerator. And in our last meeting, and these are all business owners. I think all of them have families. The members, they have kids at different ages, and trauma came up as an issue. Actually, I think it's come up as an issue in multiple times. So I just, a little bit of a tangent, but I've just noticed that a lot of the persona of a business owner, with the pressures and challenges and the need to perform, and again, more self-talk, negative, like how come you're not performing, and there's no one, typically you're kind of alone, a symbolism where you're alone at the top of a mountain here, and you don't really have, you have people that you think they expect you to have the answers, and so you're kind of stuck in your head a lot. My question though, based on that last story is what if someone's listening to this, whether they're a business owner or just someone in an unhealthy relationship, or just is experiencing your very powerful analogy of like you're in the state of like post-accident, you're in that state all the time. Yeah. What are some recommendations? Like what's something they can do? What's something they could read? Please give information about your own resources you've been creating. But what would you recommend? Like, let's say I came to you and I said, hey, I'm in a really bad relationship. I think it's because I have this negative self-talk. What would you recommend to someone?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is to start to practice self-compassion. It's not easy. It takes practice. Kristen Neff popularized self-compassion. And self-compassion, it's like what it sounds. It's just being compassionate to yourself. Basically, treat yourself like you would a best friend going through a hard time, a lover going through a hard time, or a young child needing your support. That's how you need to talk to yourself. And so, the problem is a lot of this is kind of like repetitive thoughts, repetitive ways of speaking to yourself. And so, for example, if you're saying nasty things to yourself because you made a mistake, you need to counter that by saying, I know that this part of myself is just trying to help, doesn't want me to get hurt, and is also based on childhood conditioning that programmed this into me. I actually did not choose to speak to myself this way, to believe these things. This was basically programmed into me at a young age before I had any choice. Now as an adult, I have a choice, and I choose to be kind to myself. So I will acknowledge. You don't want to resist, you want to acknowledge. So say, thank you for that perspective. And also I would try and like visualize the age that you were when you first like started talking to yourself, or when somebody said that thing to you. It's typically a caregiver, like a parent. And think back to that age and to yourself that age, and look at yourself and be like, talk to yourself, be like, that must have been really hard when they said that to you. And do things like talk to yourself kindly, be like, look, they were going through a hard time, they didn't mean to hurt you. This doesn't mean that you're a bad person. This doesn't mean that you're unworthy. This doesn't mean that you're unlovable. It's just adults sometimes they have challenges and they don't know how to deal with their frustration. They have built up trauma and they just explode, but it had nothing to do with you. It was all about them. And so it's basically repeatedly going over that process, and also telling yourself that like, look, everybody messes up, everybody fails. It's part of the human condition. Like the example that Tony Robbins gives is like, how long would you give a toddler to learn how to walk? They're obviously going to be falling and stumbling. Like, of course, you let them try hundreds of times if that's what they need to do. Do the same with yourself. So like, if the negative self-talk keeps coming up, the negative thoughts, that's okay. It's just going to take practice. But I'm telling you, over time, as you speak to yourself more kindly, as you talk to that part of yourself that's speaking to yourself negatively, as you give compassion to the younger part of yourself that was traumatized, like over time, the dialogue will start to change. Also, what I recommend is if you say stuff to yourself like, I suck, I'm worthless, I want you to practice saying to yourself the opposite as well. After going through the process of talking to yourself and being kind to yourself, be like, you know what? I'm not worthless. I'm worthy. I have challenges, but I'm working on bettering myself and I'm going to get there. So also practice basically speaking to yourself in the opposite way of the negative way of speaking to yourself. Something else that you can also do is, I would say, it's a form of affirmation called incantation. And what that is saying affirmations with emotion and with energy, and also in stress. So what's an example of stress? Do affirmations while taking a cold shower. Do affirmations while like icing your face, which I do, and head, or taking an ice bath, because the stress, like memory is very tied to emotion and to feeling. So if you tie the affirmation to emotion and feeling, it will take hold much more quickly. So for example, I say stuff like I'm worthy of love and belonging. I can handle any situation because I'm smart and resourceful. I'm on my side no matter what. I'm conquering all my demons. I'm slaying all dragons in my path. I'm overcoming any obstacle. And I could tell you, it depends on the person, but over time, through repetition, you don't need perfection, you just need consistency. If you're consistent with doing this, with the affirmations, with practicing, speaking to yourself more kindly, seeing yourself as a friend who's struggling. If you had a friend who's struggling, would you start screaming at them and cussing them out and telling them how worthless they are and how they always screw up and stuff? Of course not. Not if you're a good friend. If you do that to your friends, you need to re-examine what kind of friend you are. But so always have the frame of I'm helping someone who's struggling, who's having a hard time. Because I'll tell you one thing, like I have an amazing relationship now with the woman of my dreams, beautiful, kind, sweet, talented. And I can tell you it's a very valuable relationship in my life. I also have 2 daughters. I love them to death. Those are friends that I love, family that I love. The number one most important relationship that you have in your life is the relationship with yourself. All other relationships are affected by that. So if you want to have better relationships, if you want to be more happy, you need to work on the relationships with yourself. And so it takes time, it takes practice. Don't expect, there's no magic pill here. Don't expect for it to happen overnight. But if you're consistent and persistent over time, you'll see the default will change from negative self-talk to positive self-talk. Now, when I go through a hard time, you know what I hear in the background? I hear like, you got this, champ. Keep going. I never used to have that. I used to have the opposite. You suck. You always mess up. Now I get the opposite. Keep going. You got this. Go, hero, go. Like, that's my internal self-talk now. So,
Love that.
like, I'm not perfect. I still feel negative sometimes. I still mess up. But now the default internally is you can overcome this. You've got this. So now instead of my ego being my enemy, my ego is my best friend, champion, and supporter. So it takes time, but look, the time's going to pass anyways. So you may as well start practicing as soon as possible. Start practicing now. And you can't change the past. You'll see, you'll get to a point where you're like, gosh, why didn't I do this sooner? But you can't change the past, but you can make your future better. And the past, as Tony Robbins says, does not have to equal your future if you make a decision to do things differently and just take feedback and adjust your approach. That's all. But self-compassion, that is the foundation for everything else. Because as long as you're able to be supportive of yourself, then you're able to go through the challenges and setbacks on the process to get to a place of healing and being centered and grounded.
That was very powerful. So clearly, Shalev is passionate about what he does. It's made a big impact in his own life. Why don't that inner voice that's so positive these days, which I love, why don't you share what your goals are for the next few years and what you want your purpose and legacy to be?
Well, I spent 12 years overcoming trauma, 12 long years. And the first few years, I didn't know what I was doing because, I tried medication, that didn't work. Treatment-resistant anxiety, treatment-resistant depression. I tried making more money, that didn't work. I tried dating the most beautiful women that I could, that didn't work. And then I realized I had to put all preconceived notions to the side and just be open-minded and just try things. And so I started going to seminars, I started going to workshops, I started reading every book I could get my hand on about psychology, about the brain, about self-development, about spirituality. And then I just started trying different methods to process and release trauma, like methods that you can do on your own, also getting treatment from healing professionals, also, plant medicines, even an animal medicine called combo. And just over time, I banged my head against the wall a lot. I tried lots of things that didn't work. But over time, I started to figure out what did work. And so my goal is to speed up time for others, so they don't have to spend many years banging their head against the wall, that hopefully they could get to a place where it took me over a decade to get, they can get to that place in 1 to 2 years. And look, that's not tomorrow, but 1 to 2 years will fly by in your life. And so I'm currently writing a book about overcoming trauma called Overcome. And in that book, I explain how trauma works. I explain the sources of trauma. I explain the mindsets required to overcome trauma. Then I talk about trauma detox methods. By trauma detox, I just mean methods to process and release trauma, because that's where I feel there's the biggest void out there these days as far as the trauma healing space. And that's what I feel like I can offer people. I'm good at synthesizing and aggregating, because that's what you do as an attorney to present a case. You have to aggregate a bunch of different facts and apply them to different laws and statutes and judicial opinions sometimes, aggregate that all together into a coherent story that a jury can understand. So that's what I'm doing with this trauma stuff. I'm aggregating everything together to make it easily understandable to people. So a bunch of methods to detox trauma on your own, then methods to detox by detox, again, I mean process and release trauma through the help of healing professionals. Then about how to maintain your momentum by limiting negative people, places, and things from your life, setting strong boundaries. Because even if you release a lot of your trauma, if you have negative, toxic people in your life, or you're in negative situations, like a negative work situation, that's going to cause the pain, the emotional pain, to accumulate again. So it's not enough just to process and release the trauma. You also need to avoid new sources of trauma that are in your life and get them out of your life. Then we'll talk about how to turn pain into purpose, how to get meaning of through what happened to you, and find ways to help others, even if it's just people in your own family or your own circle. And then finally, we end the book with the main keys to overcoming trauma. And that basically is just to have a whatever it takes mindset, and also to always keep going no matter what. Because there will be setbacks, there will be challenges. One of the only certainties about life is there will be negative things that happen. But as you process and release your trauma and gain these tools to deal with painful emotion and suppressed, repressed, and accumulated trauma, you will have way more ways to be able to deal with painful things that happen in your life when they do happen. Because look, even if you get negative influences out of your life being life, there will still be challenges that come up. And so, just real quick about the always keep going. I learned that from my grandfather. He was super inspirational. The grandfather on my mother's side, not the alcoholic. He was a doctor. He got run over by a big rig truck at the age of 43. He almost died. And then when he came to, the doctor said he would never walk again. He said, not only am I going to walk again, I'm going to run a marathon. Then in his 50s, he ran 3 marathons.
Wow.
So inspirational. And I remember I saw him the day before he passed, and I knew the end was near, and I just told him how his story was so inspirational to me. And one of the reasons I never gave up was seeing how he got through that issue. Because, by the way, when he was taken home from the hospital, my grandmother brought around a wheelchair and said, take that away. I don't want it. And she goes, what do you mean? You can't even walk. He goes, I don't need it. He wouldn't take the wheelchair. He dragged himself out of the car by his hands and his arms. He used his hands and arms to drag himself into the house. And my aunt was standing in the front door, tears streaming down her face. And every day he would drag himself by his arms into the pool and to do rehab, rehab work. And slowly he was able to walk over months, and then able to jog, and then able to run. And then he ran those 3 marathons in his 50s. And so this is a great metaphor for overcoming trauma. I know it might seem totally hopeless. For me, the thought of going through my day without severe emotional pain and anxiety just seemed impossible. Like it was more possible for me to fly to Mars. But you just got to start with baby steps, You drag yourself around at first, and then you walk, and then you jog, and eventually you'll run. And you'll run that marathon of life with happiness and success and fulfillment and just joy and just feeling normal and not being riddled with pain. And it's possible as long as you always keep going, because in that last conversation that I had with him, what he said to me, his last words to me, other than I love you, were, that's right, you must always keep going. And so that's what I want to tell everybody out there. If you set that intention and always keep going, It doesn't matter what you've been through before. It doesn't matter what addictions you've had, what screw-ups you've had, broken relationships, business failures. None of that matters. If you overcome this, everything will be better, and you'll feel normal. And when you go from being trapped in hell to feeling normal, that's heaven on earth. So that's what I wish for you, and for you or anybody in your life perhaps struggling with this. That's what I wish for you and for them. It is possible to do this as long as you follow the right steps and as long as you always keep going.
I love that. So powerful. And again, it's always very inspiring to talk to you. You're so passionate about this. I look forward to reading your book. And I'll put some links in here for Shalev's social media.
Oh yeah, by the way, sorry, I forgot to say, I do have a YouTube channel. I need to get back to posting on there, but I do have some foundational videos, especially about processing and releasing trauma, which again is a huge issue. And so my YouTube channel is called Transform with Lev. So at Transform with Lev, Lev. And so check that out. It's free information. I just want to help people that are struggling out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And one final thing, if you care to share. So you're 3 months into the mastermind group. Mm-hmm. We've worked prior on your business strategy side and systems and operations. If there's anything you want to share that you are getting or have gotten out of the group or the process, that in case there's someone else you know or someone listening that would be interested in just learning more, what are some anecdotal things you can share that you enjoy from the group?
Well, the group's great. I've been in other masterminds. One of the challenges of being in a mastermind, especially if it's a successful one, is sometimes there's just a lot of people and it can feel a bit overwhelming. And also, there's, several like billionaires and decamillionaires, and you can feel really out of place. Although I'm very pro every mastermind, they definitely help you level up. Like Ali and I met in a mastermind called Genius Network. But what's great about Impact Delivered, Ali's mastermind, is it's smaller, still with very successful people, but it's a smaller group of 8 to 10. And so you're able to get a lot more individualized attention. You're able to get a lot more granular. It's easier to build kind of trust with the others because it's a smaller group, and because it's the same group every meeting rather than different people every meeting. It's easier to help with accountability and feedback. And you already know what's going on in that person's life, their challenges, and so you're able to think about it some more in between the meetings. And the feedback has been really outstanding. It's already helping me in both my business and my personal life. And I think one of the big benefits to masterminds is it basically speeds up time for you, because you're dealing with people who have a wealth of knowledge in an area that you may not have a wealth of knowledge. So they could have 5, 10, 20, even 30 years experience in something that you have 0 years experience in. So they can impart all that knowledge right away to you in the meeting, and you can immediately apply and execute what they told you about instead of kind of going through trial and error for years. And they can also tell you about certain pitfalls to avoid. So it's kind of like having a map that matches the territory, and it just speeds up your progress.
Love that. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm looking forward to our next monthly meeting and a strategy session with your team sometime this week. Before we go, a little bit of additional framework from Shalev as we were talking post-interview. Shalev, why don't you share what you had to say?
What I was telling Ali is that one of the big reasons that a lot of people quit when they start on the trauma healing journey is, and this is similar to why people quit when they go on a weight loss journey or a business development journey, is because there is a lag between when you take right action and when you start to see results. So you could be doing the same positive thing for a couple of months, taking right action, but you're still not feeling any better. In fact, when you're dealing with processing and releasing trauma, sometimes you feel worse as you do it, because again, it's kind of painful to pull out the thorn. But that's part of the process. So just know that when you're on this journey, even if you're not seeing immediate results, that if you keep doing the right action, and if you're consistent and persistent, you will start to see results over time. And even though it could take a while to completely overcome the trauma, you will feel better along the way. So just understand that part of the journey is that at first you're going to be doing the right things, but you won't see any results. You might even feel worse. But if you stick with it, if you keep going, you'll start to feel better over time. And then ultimately, you'll get to the other side, to the point where you feel just normal and okay throughout the day. You'll have, let's say if your anxiety level is an 8, it'll come down. At first, it could go to a 9 as you're initially doing the trauma processing and release methods, the trauma detox. But then if you stick with it, it'll start to come down. It'll come down to a 7 and then a 6. At a certain point, depending on how diligent you are, it'll come down to a 5. And then once you're all the way to the other side, your anxiety will fluctuate between a 0 and a 2 throughout the day. And so just understand that if you feel worse at first, if you're not making progress at first, that is totally normal. You're not doing anything wrong. All you have to do is just stick with the process.
Awesome. All right. Now you know. Don't give up and stick with the process. Thank you all. Always appreciate you. Hopefully we can meet after the book is launched as well.
Definitely.
And see how that's progressing. You could share some of what you learned on the journey to write a book too. That'd be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.
I guess.
Bye.